I returned early to surprise him, only to find his car parked exactly where he promised to keep it empty. He had just texted me claiming he was 3,000 miles away. Inside, the air reeked of cheap perfume. Then I heard her whisper from our bedroom, "You are so tight." I did not scream. I hit record. If they wanted to turn our marriage into a robbery, I would turn it into a trial. My name is Mara Calloway. At 34 years old, I serve as the Senior Manager of Risk and Compliance Ops for Stonebridge Vector Solutions. My entire career is built on the ability to identify structural weaknesses before they cause a collapse. I analyze patterns, predict failures, and mitigate damage. I am paid to see the things other people miss. Yet, as I pulled my car up the slick pavement of our townhouse driveway in Richmond, Virginia, I realized I had missed the most obvious fracture in my own foundation. I had returned a day early. I had just closed the biggest contract of the quarter, and despite the torrential rain hammering against the windshield, I felt a warm, foolish hum of excitement in my chest. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to celebrate. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Colin Hart. Just checked into the hotel in San Diego. Long flight. Miss you. I looked down at the phone, then up through the rain-streaked windshield. Colin's black sedan was parked right in front of the garage. It was sitting in the exact spot he had made a point of telling me to keep clear for the landscapers. He was not 3,000 miles away. He was 30 feet away. I did not panic. Panic is a liability. I killed the engine and stepped out into the downpour. The rain soaked my blouse instantly, but I felt cold for a different reason. I unlocked the front door with a steady hand. The house was dark, but the sensory data hit me immediately. The air did not smell like my home. It smelled of a cloying, floral fabric softener I never purchased and a vanilla body spray that reeked of the discount aisle. I slipped off my heels, leaving them on the mat. I moved through the foyer, my stocking feet silent on the hardwood. From the top of the stairs, a sound drifted down. It was a giggle, soft, breathy, and utterly comfortable. Then came a whisper, Colin's voice, unmistakable and low. You are so tight. The blood in my veins turned to ice, but my hand remained steady as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not turn on the flashlight. I swiped to the camera and hit record. I ascended the stairs, hugging the wall where the floorboards were less likely to creak. The door to the master bedroom was cracked open 3 inches. The light from the hallway landing cut a thin slice across the bed. I raised the phone. The lens focused before my eyes did. I saw the tangle of limbs. I saw my husband. And then the woman turned her head slightly, catching the faint light. It was not a stranger. It was not a random mistake. The profile was sharp, familiar, and devastating. It was Sabrina Holt, my brother Evan's wife. My thumb hovered over the screen. A scream began to build in my throat, a primal thing that wanted to tear the door off its hinges, but my training overrode it. Risk assessment confrontation now yields emotional release but destroys strategic advantage. I needed leverage. I lowered the phone, ensuring the file saved. I backed away, step by silent step, retreating down the stairs like a ghost haunting her own life. I reached the front door, stepped out into the rain, and locked it from the outside. I sat in my car, water dripping from my hair onto the leather seats, and dialed. Tessa Monroe answered on the first ring. She was not just my oldest friend. She was a shark in a pencil skirt who specialized in high-asset divorce litigation. Mara. It is late. Is everything okay? Colin is here, I said, my voice sounding detached, foreign. He is inside, with a woman. Oh, Mara, I am so sorry. Did you confront him? No. It is Sabrina. It is Evan's wife, Tessa. They are in my bed. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds. When Tessa spoke again, her voice had shifted. The friend was gone. The attorney was present. Do not go back in there. Do not scream. Do not cry. And for the love of God, Mara, do not post anything online. You have the footage? Yes. Good. Listen to me carefully. Drive away. Turn off your location sharing immediately. Tonight. Tonight, you are the shadow. And tomorrow, you are the verdict. I hung up. I disabled the GPS tracking on my phone and shifted the car into drive. I stared at the dark windows of the house I paid for. The home where my husband was currently betraying me with my family. I did not know where I was driving to, but I knew exactly what I was driving towards. I merged onto the highway, the city lights blurring in the rain, and let the darkness swallow me whole. Tessa watched the video on my phone screen with the detached precision of a radiologist looking for a tumor. She did not gasp. She did not offer me a tissue. She replayed the clip 3 times, pausing on the timestamp and zooming in on Sabrina's face to confirm identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry and dangerous. "We have the cause," Tessa said. Her voice clipped. "Now we need the capital. Emotional devastation is not a legal strategy. Mara, leverage is. Go back there. Give them exactly 30 seconds of warning. I want them panicked. People make mistakes when they are terrified." I drove home with the radio off. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black. I pulled into the driveway, noting that the sedan was still there, but moved slightly to the left. I triggered the garage door opener. The mechanical groan of the motor was my warning shot. I sat in the car for a count of 10, giving them just enough time to hear the sound, process the horror, and scramble. Then I walked to the front door, opened it loudly, and pitched my voice into a register of exhausted delight. "Colin, honey." I managed to catch the red-eye home. I waited. 1 beat, 2 beats, then came the thud of heavy footsteps and the distinct sound of a door being slammed upstairs. By the time Colin appeared at the top of the banister, he was buttoning a shirt that was misaligned by 1 hole. His hair was wet at the temples. "Babe," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. You are back early, I thought. I thought you were stuck until Tuesday." He rushed down the stairs and pulled me into a hug that felt less like affection and more like containment. His body was rigid, a wall of tension vibrating against me. He smelled of mouthwash and fresh sweat. "The contract closed early," I said, letting him hold me, forcing my arms to wrap around the man who had just destroyed my life. "But I saw your car. I thought you were in San Diego." "The conference," he stammered, pulling back but keeping his hands on my shoulders, anchoring me in place. "Total nightmare. Electrical fire at the convention center. They canceled the whole thing while I was at the airport. I just came back and crashed. Didn't want to worry you." "Poor thing," I said. I moved past him, heading up the stairs. He scrambled to follow, hovering close to my heels. Inside the bedroom, the air had been aggressively sprayed with an odor neutralizer, but the underlying scent of vanilla musk lingered. The bed was made, but poorly. The duvet was lumpy. The sheets were flannel. We slept on Egyptian cotton in the summer. They had stripped the bed and replaced the linens in a panic. On the nightstand, a single wine glass sat next to the lamp, a dark red residue pooling at the bottom. "I thought red wine gave you migraines," I noted, gesturing to the glass. Colin froze. "Oh, that? Yeah. I just needed something to knock me out. It has been a stressful day." I did not press. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and changed into my pajamas. When I returned, Colin was in bed, lying stiffly on his back, feigning sleep. I climbed in beside him. I lay in the darkness, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. It took 45 minutes for the tension to leave his jaw and for the soft, rhythmic snore to begin. This was my window. I moved with the slow deliberation of a bomb disposal technician. I reached for his phone on the nightstand. I angled the screen toward his face, hovering it 6 inches above him, the Face ID padlock icon at the top of the screen unlocked. I slid the phone away and slipped out of bed, retreating to the walk-in closet. I did not look at his texts first. Amateurs look for love letters. Professionals look for logistics. I went to his home screen. There was a calculator app on the 3rd page, nestled between a weather widget and a stock tracker. It looked standard, but I knew Colin used the built-in calculator in the control center. I opened the app and typed in a specific sequence of numbers I had seen Evan use, once a common passcode for these Vault apps. It did not work. I tried Colin's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried the date we closed on this house. The screen blinked, and the interface shifted. It was a hidden drive. I bypassed the photo album titled Site Inspections. I did not need to see more of Sabrina's anatomy tonight and went straight to the folder marked Docs. My breath hitched. It was not just infidelity. It was an embezzlement scheme. There were screenshots of bank transfers, receipts for consulting fees paid to a generic account. But the dates aligned perfectly with withdrawals from our joint savings. There were photos of credit card applications in my name cards I had never seen, with limits of $20,000 each. Then I saw the chat log with Sabrina. Sabrina Evan is suspicious about the credit line. We need to move the funds faster. Colin, relax. Mara is blind. I will pull another $5,000 from the equity line tomorrow. Just make sure the LLC paperwork is ready. They were not just sleeping together. They were using my credit, my home equity, and my salary to fund a getaway strategy. They were gutting our marriage financially before killing it legally. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, replacing the shock. I took photos of every screen using my own phone, uploading them instantly to the encrypted cloud server Tessa had set up for me. I captured the transfer logs, the fake invoices, and the admission of fraud. Once the upload was complete, I wiped my fingerprints from his screen, closed the apps, and crept back into the bedroom. I placed the phone exactly where it had been, aligned with the grain of the wood table. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. I stared at the ceiling. Colin shifted in his sleep, his hand brushing against my hip. I did not recoil. I lay there, calculating interest rates and prison sentences, waiting for the sun to rise so I could begin the audit. The next morning, I weaponized my coffee. I sat at the kitchen island, my laptop open and angled just enough so that anyone walking past would catch the bold header on the screen. It was a fabricated email from my company's HR department, drafted by me 10 minutes prior. The subject line read, Mandatory Internal Audit Spousal Asset Tracing and Irregular Expenditure Review. Colin walked in, knotting his tie with the frantic energy of a man who was already late. He kissed the top of my head, a gesture that now felt like a brand, and reached for his travel mug. Compliance audit, he asked, his eyes darting to the screen. He tried to sound casual, but the hand holding the mug tightened until his knuckles turned white. Yeah, I sighed, typing a meaningless sentence. Standard procedure for anyone with access to level 4 clearance. They are digging through everything. Joint accounts, credit reports, spousal investments. It is a headache. Colin froze. The coffee mug hovered halfway to his mouth. Spousal... Wait, does that mean they need to see my accounts? My business is private. Mara, you know that. I think they just flag large transfers, I said, not looking up. Anything over $10,000 in the last 6 months. Why you do not have anything to worry about, right? No. Obviously not, he stammered, taking a sip that must have burned his tongue. It is just intrusive. How soon does this start, Monday? I lied. Monday, he repeated. Right, Monday. He left the house 3 minutes later, forgetting his lunch. I watched from the window as he made a call from the driveway before he even started the car. He was running scared, which meant he was going to make moves. I immediately dialed Tessa. He took the bait. I said, Good. Tessa replied, Now. Lock the doors. Open a new checking account at a bank you have never used. Route your entire paycheck there starting today. Call the credit bureaus and freeze your files. If he tries to open another credit line in your name to fund his exit, I want him to hit a brick wall. I spent the morning building a financial fortress. By noon, I had hired Miles Kerr. Miles was not the type of private investigator who wore a trench coat and hid in bushes. He was a former forensic accountant who tracked infidelity through spreadsheets rather than lipstick stains. He did not care about feelings, he cared about the math. 2 days later, Miles sat across from me in a quiet coffee shop, sliding a manila folder across the table. He is not just cheating. Mrs. Calloway, Miles said, his voice flat. He is mobilizing. I opened the folder. The photos were high resolution and damning. They showed Colin meeting Sabrina not at a hotel, but in the parking lot of a grim industrial park on the edge of town. They were exchanging thick envelopes. Cash. He is pulling cash out of ATMs in $400 increments to avoid structuring flags. Miles explained. But here is the interesting part. He stops at Unit 419 at the West Side storage facility 3 times a week. I looked at the picture. Colin was carrying a heavy banker's box into a roll-up storage unit. He was not moving golf clubs or old clothes. He was moving paper. I ran a search on the address associated with the unit rental. Miles continued. It is billed to a newly formed LLC registered in Nevada. Nevada offers high anonymity for business owners. The company is called Heartline Consulting Group. Heartline. Hart and Holt. It was so arrogant it was almost funny. He is moving assets, I said, the realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. He is shifting liquid cash and physical records into a shell company before he files for divorce. He wants to claim he is broke so he does not have to pay alimony, and he wants to split the debt he racked up in my name. Exactly. Miles nodded. That storage unit is not a closet. It is a vault. He is hiding the paper trail of the money he stole from your marriage. I stared at the photo of my husband, the man I had vowed to love and cherish, lugging a box of our future into a dark metal room to share with my brother's wife. I called Tessa. He has a Nevada LLC. I told her, and a storage unit full of financial records. Nevada, Tessa mused, her tone sharpening. That is premeditated. That is sophisticated. Mara, listen to me. If he was just sleeping with her, we would be fighting over who gets the dog. But this is dissipation of marital assets. This is fraud. What do? I asked. We let him keep packing the box, Tessa said. Let him think he is winning. Adultery only makes him look like a bad husband. Fraud. Fraud is what makes him fall. I decided to see how far the rot extended. I waited until we were seated in the living room, the television playing low in the background, offering a facade of domestic normalcy. I looked up from my tablet, keeping my expression bright and naive. I was looking at that plot of land near the lake again. I said casually, the price dropped by 15%. We have the liquidity in the joint investment account. I think we should put down a deposit. Colin stiffened. The magazine in his hands crinkled as his grip tightened. He did not look at me immediately, which was his first mistake. An honest man looks you in the eye. A liar looks for an exit. We can't, he said, his voice tight. I told you, Mara, that capital is locked in municipal bonds. We would take a massive penalty if we liquidated now. Like 40%. 40%, I asked, feigning shock. That seems high. The market is volatile, he snapped, finally looking at me with a flash of irritation that masked his panic. Just trust me on this. The money is there, but we cannot touch it for at least 3 years. Okay, I said, retreating instantly. You know best. I went upstairs and opened my laptop. I did not check the bond market. I pulled up the spreadsheet Miles had compiled. I summed up the transfers to the mysterious vendors and the cash withdrawals over the last 8 months. The total came to $112,000. I checked our investment portfolio statement. The The locked bond value Colin had cited was exactly $112,000. The money was not locked. The money was gone. I needed to know how he planned to cover the hole. I logged into our shared cloud storage drive. Most people think hitting delete removes a file, but they forget the digital trash bin. I scrolled through the discarded files from the last week. Buried between old receipts and duplicate photos was a PDF file named simply POA Execute. I opened it. It was a general financial power of attorney, granting Colin Hart full control over my individual assets, real estate, and credit lines. At the bottom of the page was my signature. I stared at it. I had never seen this document before. I zoomed in to 400%. The edges of the ink strokes were jagged, pixelated. The background white of the signature box was a slightly different shade of gray than the rest of the document. He had scanned my signature from our mortgage closing papers, cropped it, and pasted it onto this document. My hands did not shake. This was no longer a marital dispute. This was forgery. This was a felony. I forwarded the file to Tessa and Miles, then closed the laptop. I went downstairs and poured myself a glass of water, moving through the house like a ghost in the machine. 2 days later, the trap arrived. Colin walked into the kitchen carrying a thick stack of papers. He tried to look bored, but the pulse in his neck was visible. "Tax extension forms," he said, dropping the pile on the counter. "Accountant needs them by tomorrow morning. Just standard stuff. Sign the tabs," I flagged. I looked at the pile. I knew the power of attorney was buried somewhere in that stack, sandwiched between legitimate tax forms. "Sure," I said. "I will get to it after dinner." I went to the bathroom and texted Tessa. He brought the papers. Her reply came in 10 seconds. "Remember the training. Distress signature. Do not give him your real hand." I stood in front of the mirror and practiced in the air with my finger. Tessa had taught me the concept of a distress marker, a subtle, consistent alteration to a signature used to indicate duress or invalidity during forensic analysis. If I ever needed to prove in court that I was tricked or coerced, this tiny flaw would be my testimony. Normally, the tail of the Y in Callaway looped gracefully back toward the left. I practiced making it a straight, sharp line that cut downward like a knife. I walked back into the kitchen. I picked up the pen. Colin was pretending to wash a dish, but he was watching me from the reflection in the window. I could feel his gaze burning into the back of my neck. He was waiting for the scratch of the pen that would hand him my life. I signed the first page, then the second. When I reached the document that felt thicker than the others, the text dense and legalistic, I did not pause. I did not read it. I simply let the pen hit the paper. Mara Callaway. I slashed the tail of the Y straight down. A small, violent mark that looked like a mistake to the naked eye, but would scream like a siren under a microscope. "Done," I said, capping the pen. Colin exhaled, a sound of relief so profound it was almost pathetic. He gathered the papers quickly, hugging them to his chest. "Great," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I will drop these off in the morning." He thought he had just disarmed me. He had no idea he had just walked into the line of fire carrying the evidence of his own destruction. Colin told me that my attendance at the Harbor Crest Meridian Group Gala was not a request, it was a requirement. To him, I was a prop. I was the silent, smiling proof of his stability, a human shield against any rumors that might be circulating about his erratic behavior. He needed the perfect wife to distract from the imperfect ledgers. Tessa had given me a different perspective. A gala is a high-target environment. Mara. She had told me over the phone as I selected my jewelry. In a boardroom, facts matter. In a ballroom, perception is reality. Rumors travel faster than wire transfers in those crowds. You do not need to scream to destroy him. You just need to whisper. I chose my outfit with the precision of a camouflage expert. I wore a midnight blue gown with long sleeves and a high-neck modest, expensive, and utterly unthreatening. I did not want to look like a woman on the warpath. I wanted to look like a woman who was trying very, very hard to hold it together. We arrived at the venue, a sprawling hotel ballroom in Norfolk. Colin gripped my elbow as we walked in, his smile tight and practiced. He steered me toward the bar, handed me a glass of sparkling water, and immediately abandoned me to charm a potential investor. I scanned the room and located my first target, Beatrice Sterling. She was the wife of the CFO, and she consumed information like oxygen. If you told Beatrice a secret, you were effectively publishing it in the company newsletter. I drifted over to her, offering a tired, fragile smile. "Mara," she exclaimed, her eyes scanning my face for cracks. "You look... well, is everything okay? Colin seems so intense lately." I looked down at my glass, running a finger around the rim. "Oh, you know Colin," I said softly. "He works so hard. I worry about him. He gets confused with his schedule." Beatrice leaned in, sensing blood. "Confused. How it is silly," I said, laughing nervously. "He told me he was in San Diego for that conference last week, but the security guard at our gated community mentioned he saw Colin's car come through the north gate at 3 a.m. that same night. I must have misunderstood his itinerary. But why would he say he was 3,000 miles away if he was just down the street?" I covered my mouth, eyes widening in mock regret. "Oh, ignore me, Beatrice. I am just tired. I am sure he had a reason. He never does anything shady." I watched the gears turn in her head. By the time I walked away, Beatrice was already scanning the room for her next listener. The seed was planted. Colin Hart was a liar, and his wife was too naive to see it. My second target was harder. Owen Price, the head of internal audit. He was a man of numbers, immune to gossip but addicted to patterns. I found him near the buffet, looking bored. "Owen," I said, approaching him with a warm smile. "I wanted to ask you something silly. I was trying to send a thank you gift to one of the vendors Colin works with. He talks about them all the time. Heartline Consulting. In Nevada." Owen paused, a shrimp skewer halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly. "Heartline," Owen asked, his brow furrowing. "We do not have a vendor in Nevada named Heartline." "That is so strange," I said, tilting my head. I saw the invoice on his desk at home. A big transfer for out-of-state logistics. Maybe I misread it. I am terrible with the business side of things. I patted his arm gently and walked away before he could ask a follow-up question. I did not need to see his face to know what was happening. I felt it. I felt the moment Owen Price stopped thinking about the buffet and started thinking about the audit trail. Heartline, Colin Hart, Nevada. The atmosphere in the room shifted over the next hour. It was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow freeze. I watched from the edge of the room as Owen pulled out his phone and made a call, his eyes fixed on the back of Colin's head. I watched Beatrice whispering to the CEO's wife, casting glances at Colin that were no longer admiring, but suspicious. Colin felt it too. He walked up to a group of senior partners, and the conversation died instantly. They turned their backs, forming a closed circle. He stood there, holding his drink, looking like a man who was being hunted but could not see the predator in the tall grass. The ride home was suffocating. The silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. As soon as we pulled into our driveway, Colin killed the engine and turned to me. His face was a mask of paranoia. "What did you say to them?" he demanded, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Owen looked at me all night like I was a thief. Beatrice would not even make eye contact. "You said something. I know you did." I unbuckled my seatbelt calmly. I turned to him, meeting his frantic eyes with a gaze as cold and clear as a winter morning. "I just made conversation." "Colin," I said, "if you are innocent, what are you afraid of?" I opened the car door and stepped out, leaving him sitting in the dark with his fear. That night, the house did not feel like a home. It felt like an interrogation room. We had barely walked through the door when Colin slapped a thick stack of documents onto the kitchen island. The veneer of the successful businessman had cracked, revealing the desperate, sweating gambler underneath. "I need these signed," he said, his voice tight. "The courier is coming at 6 in the morning to run them to the title company. We have to move on this tonight." I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was past midnight. "Colin, it is late," I said, rubbing my temples to feign exhaustion. "Can't this wait until breakfast? My eyes are blurring." "No," he snapped, pacing behind me. "It cannot wait. The rates change tomorrow. If we miss this window, we lose the leverage on the bond restructure. Just sign where the tabs are. Mara, stop making everything a production." I sat down and pulled the papers toward me. I did not just look at the tabs, I looked at the header. It was not a bond restructure. It was a hard money loan application, a high-interest, predatory instrument usually reserved for desperate house flippers. The principal amount was $250,000. The collateral was our home. The borrower was listed as Mara Calloway and Colin Hart, but the disbursement instructions routed the funds entirely to an account ending in 492, Heartline Consulting Group. He was taking out $250,000 of debt in my name and funneling the cash directly into his escape pod. "This language is so dense," I murmured, flipping a page. "Section 4 talks about a waiver of spousal." "What is this?" "It is standard legal jargon," Colin yelled, and then he slammed his hand down on the quartz countertop. The sound cracked through the quiet kitchen like a gunshot. "Jesus, Mara, do you have to question me on every single thing I am trying to save our financial future? And you are acting like I am trying to trick you. Just sign the damn paper." I froze. This was the moment. I subtly tapped the screen of my smartwatch, activating the voice memo function. "You are scaring me, Colin," I said, keeping my voice small. I want to understand what I am signing." "You do not need to understand it," he hissed, leaning over me, his shadow blocking the overhead light. "You just need to trust me. Sign it. Now." "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, I will sign." I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I located the signature line. Mara Calloway. I executed the distress signature perfectly. I flattened the loop of the Y into a sharp, jagged downward stroke, just as I had practiced. It was a forensic scream for help, embedded in ink. As I turned the pages, I used the split second of page flipping to angle my phone, snapping blurry but legible photos of the loan terms and the routing number. I finished the last page and capped the pen. "There," I said. Colin snatched the papers away before the ink was even dry. He did not say thank you. He did not apologize for yelling. He hugged the file to his chest, the tension leaving his shoulders in a rush of relief that was sickening to watch. He thought he had won. "Good," he muttered. "Go to bed. I have to organize these for the courier." The next morning, Colin left the house with a bounce in his step. He carried his briefcase like it contained a trophy. He believed the door to his new life was finally open. I waited until his car turned the corner. Then I drove straight to Tessa's office. I projected the photos I had taken onto the large monitor in her conference room. Tessa stood with her arms crossed, staring at the hard money loan terms. "This is not asset hiding," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "This is financial demolition. He is leveraging the house to the hilt. If he defaults on this loan, which he will, once he runs off with the cash, the lender comes for the house. You lose the equity, you lose the roof over your head, and you are left with the debt." "We have to stop the transfer," I said, reaching for my phone. "I can call the bank. I can claim duress." Tessa turned to me, her eyes cold and sharp. "No," she said. "What, Tessa? That is $250,000 if we stop it now." "It is just an attempted crime," Tessa explained, leaning her hands on the table. "He can claim it was a misunderstanding. He can say he intended to put the money into a joint account later. It becomes he said, She said mess. She looked back at the screen, at the routing number for the Nevada LLC. But if the money hits that account, she continued, it becomes wire fraud. It becomes grand larceny. It becomes a federal offense. We do not want to stop him. Mara, we want him to cross the finish line. Let the money touch his account. Once it does, he has no way back. I looked at the digital evidence of my husband's betrayal. I thought about the way he had slammed his hand on the counter. I thought about the vanilla perfume in my bedroom. Let it bleed, I said. Miles Kerr sat in my living room, the glow of his laptop illuminating his grim face. He did not look like a man who enjoyed being right. He looked like a pathologist explaining a particularly nasty cause of death. We found a synchronized note in the hidden folder, Miles said, tapping a key. It is labeled Phase 2. It lists a set of equipment leases for a shell company. But the credit score requirement is 750 or higher. Colin's score tanked last month because of the utilization ratio. Sabrina has a bankruptcy on record from 3 years ago. So they cannot get the loan, I said. Hopeful. No, Miles corrected. They just need a guarantor. The note has a name next to the co-signer field. It says Evan. My stomach dropped. They were not satisfied with destroying me. They were going to cannibalize my brother's financial future to fund their escape. They planned to leverage Evan's clean credit and his successful landscaping business to secure heavy machinery leases, then vanish, leaving him on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I reached for my phone to call Evan, but Tessa's hand shot out and clamped over my wrist. No, she ordered. If you call him now, you sound like the jealous sister. You sound paranoid. Evan trusts Colin. If you push him, he will tell Colin, and they will pivot to a different strategy that we cannot see. We need to kill this idea in the room, while they are watching. The opportunity arrived 2 nights later at my parents' house. It was supposed to be a celebration of my father's retirement. The dining room smelled of rosemary chicken and red wine. My mother was laughing, pouring gravy, completely oblivious that half the people at her table were engaged in a war. Sabrina waited until dessert to spring the trap. She looked radiant, playing the part of the ambitious entrepreneur perfectly. Actually, Evan and I were looking at expanding, Sabrina said, touching Evan's arm affectionately. There is this amazing opportunity to lease some high-end excavators for a government contract. The only hiccup is the bank needs a secondary signature. Just a formality, really. Colin nodded, wiping his mouth with a napkin. He looked at the picture of the supportive brother-in-law. It is standard procedure, Colin added, his voice smooth. I looked at the numbers for them. It is a no-brainer. You just sign as a guarantor. Evan, you never actually have to pay anything. It just helps the approval algorithm. Evan looked at Sabrina, his eyes soft. He was ready to say yes. He was ready to sign his life away because he loved her. I did not scream. I did not accuse. I took a slow sip of my wine and set the glass down with a deliberate clink. That is interesting, I said, my voice conversational but projecting clearly across the table. We actually just had a case like that at Stonebridge, a guarantor arrangement. The table went quiet. Colin's hand froze on his wine glass. What happened? My mother asked innocently. Well, I continued, looking directly at Evan, but speaking like a textbook. The thing people forget is that guarantor is just a legal term for debtor. If the primary borrower defaults or, say, moves the assets to a different legal entity, the bank does not chase them. They audit the guarantor. They freeze the guarantor's business accounts. They seize personal property. I saw Evan shift in his chair. I leaned in slightly. And the worst part, I said, letting my gaze drift to Colin, is that banks now use forensic digital tracing. If they find that the loan application misrepresented the use of funds, like, if the money went to a shell company instead of equipment, it is not just bankruptcy. It is federal bank fraud for everyone who signed. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Evan pulled his arm away from Sabrina slightly. The color drained from Sabrina's face until she looked like a wax figure. Colin stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. They knew I was talking about them. They knew I knew, but they could say absolutely nothing without revealing themselves. Evan stammered, clearing his throat. I mean, maybe we should have my lawyer look at the papers first, just to be safe. I can't risk the landscaping business. Smart, I said, smiling at my brother. Never sign what you cannot afford to lose. The dinner ended in a strained, brittle atmosphere. As we were leaving, I saw Sabrina standing by the coat rack, looking terrified. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Colin, who was pacing by the car with a fury radiating off him like heat. I waited until I was in my car, parked down the street. I pulled a burner phone from my glove box, another tool Miles had provided. I typed a message to Sabrina's personal number. You are a pawn. He is going to blame you when the audit hits. Do you have an exit strategy? I watched through the rear view mirror as Sabrina checked her phone in the driveway. She stiffened. She looked around at the dark street, her eyes wide. Then, my burner phone buzzed. I have evidence, the text read, but he is watching me. I need to talk. I arranged the meeting at a crowded bakery on 4th Street. The air smelled of roasted coffee and burnt sugar, a sharp contrast to the nausea churning in my stomach. I sat at a small table near the window, my back against the wall. Miles Kerr was seated 3 tables away, hidden behind a newspaper and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses, looking for all the world like a bored retiree. Tessa was on speed dial, ready to deploy a restraining order if things went sideways. Sabrina arrived 10 minutes late. She looked nothing like the woman I had seen in my bed or at the gala. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, her skin was sallow, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights. She looked less like a seductress and more like a fugitive. She sat down, her hands trembling so violently that the silverware on the table rattled. I did not want to hurt you. Mara, she stammered, her voice thin and brittle. You have to believe me. Save the apology, I said, my voice low and steady. Just tell me how it started. It was the debt, she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. I had $20,000 in credit card debt from my old business. Colin found out. He offered to pay it off. He said it was a family loan. But then he said I owed him. Not money. Favors. It started with information about Evan's accounts. And then it became this. I am not his partner, Mara. I am his hostage. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. She placed it on the table but kept her fingers pressed firmly on top of it. He likes to brag, Sabrina said, a bitter edge entering her voice. He records himself. He thinks he is a genius. This drive, it has everything. Recordings of him explaining how he is funneling the money through the LLC, how he plans to paint you as mentally unstable to the courts, and the plan for Evan, the equipment lease. I said, worse, she said. He is going to max out Evan's credit lines and then default. He calls Evan the clean skin. He plans to leave your brother bankrupt. I reached out to take the drive. My fingertips brushed the cold metal. Suddenly, a phone buzzed aggressively on the table. It was Sabrina's. The screen lit up with a single name, Colin. Sabrina flinched as if she had been struck. Her face went from pale to ghostly white. He is here, she gasped, staring at the phone. He is tracking me. I turned the location off, but he must have a secondary tracker on the car. Give me the drive, I commanded. No, she cried, snatching the USB back and shoving it into her pocket. If he sees you with it, he will kill me. You do not know him, Mara. You do not know what he becomes when he is cornered. She scrambled up from the chair, knocking it over in her haste. Sabrina, wait, I hissed, but she was already running toward the door. I watched through the window as a black sedan screeched to the curb outside. Colin did not get out. He simply leaned across and threw the passenger door open. It was not an invitation. It was a command. Sabrina hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking back at the bakery, looking at me. Then, terror won. She dove into the car. The door slammed, and the car peeled away into traffic, cutting off a taxi. My phone buzzed. It was Miles. "I am on them," Miles said. "Head south. I will send you the pin." I ran to my car. The chase led us away from the city center and into the industrial district, ending at a place called the Juniper Vault. It was a windowless brick building with a discreet entrance, a private lounge known for strong drinks, dim lighting, and 0 security cameras. It was the kind of place where men went to conduct business they did not want on the books. I parked down the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. I watched Miles pull up 2 cars behind me. "They are in VIP room 3. Miles texted, "Do not go in alone." I gripped the steering wheel. My instinct was to kick down the door, to scream, to drag them out by their collars. But if I stormed in there now, I would just be the hysterical wife crashing a private meeting. Colin would spin it. He would hide the drive. He would win. I needed a witness. I needed someone whose heart would break so loudly that it shattered Colin's lies forever. I pulled out the burner phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart, but I did not call. I typed a message to Evan. "If you want to know why they really need your signature, come to the Juniper Vault, VIP room 3, right now. Do not call. Just come." I waited. 12 minutes passed. They were the longest 12 minutes of my life. Then, a battered work truck pulled into the lot. Evan jumped out. He was still wearing his work boots and a shirt dusted with drywall plaster. He looked confused, scared, and out of place among the luxury sedans. I stepped out of the shadows. "Mara," he asked, his eyes wide. "What are you doing here?" "Who sent that text I did?" I said softly. "What is going on?" he asked, searching my face. "Is Sabrina here? I cannot tell you," I said, stepping aside to clear his path to the entrance. "You have to hear it for yourself." "Room 3. Evan looked at me, and he saw the grief in my eyes. He didn't ask another question. He turned and walked toward the heavy steel door of the club. I followed him, staying 3 steps back. The bouncer tried to stop him, but Evan brushed past with the momentum of a freight train. He walked down the dimly lit hallway, the bass of the music thumping in the walls. He stopped in front of a door marked with a brass number 3. He put his hand on the handle. He paused for a second, perhaps hoping he was wrong, hoping I was crazy. Then, he pushed the door open. The room was quiet, insulated from the music, and the voice that drifted out was clear, arrogant, and unmistakably Colin's. "Evan is a golden retriever. Babe. He will sign whatever we put in front of him. We bleed his credit dry. We take the cash, and by the time the bank comes for him, we will be drinking mojitos in." Evan stood in the doorway, frozen. His world did not end with a bang. It ended with the sound of his best friend laughing at his destruction. Inside the VIP room, the suffocating tension was thick enough to choke on. Evan looked at the scene before him with the hollowed-out expression of a man watching his house burn down while he was still inside it. Colin was leaning over Sabrina, his hand gripping her wrist, trying to pry the silver USB drive from her fingers. He froze as the light from the hallway hit him. He looked at Evan, then at Sabrina, and for a split second, the predator's mask slipped, revealing the panic underneath. Then, he tried to smile. "Evan," Colin exclaimed, releasing Sabrina's wrist as if it burned him. "Thank God you are here. She is having a breakdown. I was trying to get her car keys before she hurt herself." Evan did not blink. He stepped into the room, his work boots heavy on the plush carpet. "I heard you," Evan said. His voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. I stood outside that door for 10 seconds. "I am just a credit tool. A golden retriever." "No, you are misinterpreting. Tell him, I said from the doorway behind Evan. Sabrina looked up. Her mascara was smeared, and she was shaking, but seeing Evan broke whatever spell Colin held over her. He made me do it, she sobbed, her voice cracking. He said he would ruin me. He said we just needed your signature to get the equipment, and then he was going to default on the lease. He was going to leave you with the debt. Evan, all of it. Evan looked at his wife. He did not scream. He did not throw a punch. He simply closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the light inside them was gone. Give me the drive, Colin snarled, dropping the act entirely. He lunged toward the table where the USB sat. I moved faster. I stepped past Evan and snatched the silver drive before Colin's fingers could graze it. He turned on me, his fists clenched, his face twisted into a snarl of pure violence. Give it to me, Mara, he hissed. Touch me, I said, holding the drive up. And you add assault to the list of felonies you are committing in front of 2 witnesses. Go ahead. Make my lawyer's day. Colin stopped. He looked at Evan, then at the bouncer who had just appeared in the hallway behind us. He realized he was outnumbered. He straightened his jacket, his eyes cold and dead. You think this is over, he whispered. You have no idea what you just started. Evan turned around. He did not look at Sabrina. He did not look at Colin. He walked out of the room, past me, and down the hallway. I followed him, leaving my husband and my sister-in-law in the silence of their own wreckage. The retaliation began before we even reached the parking lot. My phone lit up with a notification from my bank. Alert, joint checking balance is 0. Then another. Alert credit card ending in 418 has been reported lost. Stolen. Colin was scrubbing the decks. He was draining our liquid assets and locking me out of the financial system. Then came the email notification. It was a blind copy forwarded to my personal address, but the original recipient was the head of human resources at Stonebridge Vector Solutions. Subject urgent concern regarding employee safety, Mara Calloway. To whom it may concern, I regret to inform you that my wife, Mara, has suffered a severe mental health episode. She is paranoid, delusional, and currently in possession of sensitive data she believes proves a conspiracy against her. I am working with doctors to get her help, but please be advised that any communications from her should be treated with extreme caution. He was not just stealing my money, he was burning my credibility. He was trying to paint me as insane so that when I spoke the truth, no one would listen. My phone rang again. It was a number I did not recognize. Mrs. Calloway, a deep voice asked. This is Detective Miller with the Richmond Police Department. We received a complaint from your husband regarding the theft of proprietary business data and domestic disturbance. We need you to come in for questioning. I hung up. I did not drive to the police station. I drove to a secure Wi-Fi spot in a coffee shop parking lot. I opened my laptop. A secure chat window popped up. It was Owen Price, the internal auditor from Harborcrest. Owen, we found the vendor, the Nevada LLC. They have billed us for $3 million in consulting fees over the last 18 months. The invoices are fake. The approval signature on every single one of them is Colin's. Mara, I know. Owen, if you have proof. Mara, I need it now. Legal is preparing to bury this unless I can prove it was malicious internal fraud. I attached the files. I sent the photos of the bank transfers. I sent the pictures Miles had taken of Colin meeting with Vivian Haskins, a known financial fixer who specialized in laundering money for executives. I sent the audio file of him coercing me to sign the loan. And finally, I sent the PDF of the power of attorney with the forged, pixelated signature. Mara, it was not just a vendor. Owen, it was an exit strategy. Here is the map. I hit send. I watched the progress bar fill up to 100%. I had just turned a messy divorce into a federal indictment. The client summit at the Grand Norfolk Hotel was designed to be Colin's coronation. The chandeliers were crystal, the champagne was vintage, and the projected quarterly earnings behind the stage were staggering. Colin stood at the podium, basking in the applause of 300 colleagues and investors. He looked like a man who owned the world. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor. I did not storm the stage. I stood at the very back of the ballroom, in the shadows near the exit. Evan stood beside me. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face set like stone. He was no longer the little brother looking for approval. He was a man waiting for justice. Sabrina made the first move. She walked through the side entrance, dressed in a sharp gray suit, looking terrified but determined. She walked straight to the table where Owen Price sat. She did not look at Colin. She simply placed the silver USB drive on the white tablecloth in front of the internal auditor. The room rippled with confusion. Owen picked up the drive. He plugged it into his laptop, which was connected to the main audio-visual system. He looked at the data for 5 seconds. Then, he stood up and walked onto the stage. He did not whisper to Colin. He reached out and physically cut the feed to Colin's microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Owen said, his voice booming through the hall, "I apologize, but we need to pause this event immediately due to newly discovered evidence of vendor fraud and money laundering involving the Heartline LLC. A gasp tore through the room. Colin looked like he had been slapped. "What is this?" Colin shouted, his voice thin without the amplification. "This is insane." "Security," Owen hit the spacebar on his laptop. Colin's voice, amplified to a deafening volume, filled the ballroom. It was the recording from the lounge. "Evan is a golden retriever, babe. We bleed his credit dry. We take the cash, and by the time the bank comes for him, we will be drinking mojitos." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room shifted from the speakers to the man on stage. Before Colin could stammer a defense, the double doors at the back swung open. Tessa Monroe walked in, flanked by a process server and 2 uniformed officers. She marched down the center aisle, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "Colin Hart," Tessa announced, holding up a sheaf of papers. "This is an emergency injunction freezing all assets associated with you and the Heartline Consulting Group. It also serves as a formal complaint for forgery, coercion, and spousal fraud." Colin gripped the podium, his knuckles white. He pointed a shaking finger at me in the back of the room. "She signed the loan," he screamed, desperate to salvage the narrative. "She signed the papers. It was consensual. She is lying because I am leaving her. I walked forward then. I moved slowly into the light. I held up the high-resolution photo of the document he had forced me to sign in the kitchen. I did sign it," I said, my voice steady enough to carry to the front row. "But look at the signature. The tail of the Y is a straight vertical slash. That is a forensic distress marker. My attorney has 10 years of my signatures on file to prove the deviation. That mark legally invalidates the contract as signed under duress." Colin froze. He looked at the screen where Owen was now projecting the image of the signature analysis. "And the best part," I continued, stopping 10 feet from the stage, "because the signature was flagged as distressed this morning, the hard money lender halted the wire transfer. The $250,000 you tried to steal never hit your account. Colin, you are not rich. You are just under arrest." The color drained from his face. He looked at the exit, but the police were already moving up the stairs. They spun him around, pulling his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. "Vivian Haskins is also named in the warrant," Tessa added, nodding toward the back where Colin's financial fixer was trying to sneak out. Security guards blocked her path instantly. I did not stay to watch them drag him out. I did not need to see him beg. I turned to Evan, who was watching the man he once idolized be treated like a common criminal. "Do you still want to call them family?" I asked softly. Evan looked at Colin, then at the floor. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Let's go." We walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the chaos behind us. The whispers followed us. But they were different now. They were not pitying the wife who was cheated on. They were terrified of the woman who fought back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how Mara handled this betrayal. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.